Hi, thanks for joining us again here at Finovate Spring 2018. I'm David Penn, research analyst for the Finovate Group. And joining me today is Tina Giorgio. She is president and CEO of ICBA Bank Card. Thank you very much for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
Sure. First, can you tell us a little bit about yourself and about ICBA?
Sure. So I've been in my role at ICBA Bank Card for about 20 months. Prior to that, I was a community banker for 25 years. So I've spent a lot of time in this space, primarily focusing on payments and digital strategy.
Okay, excellent. Now you're going to be participating a little later in a fireside chat talking about the relationship between financial institutions, vendors, and fintechs. Could you give us a little bit of a sort of a preview of that conversation and what it is about those relationships that makes them challenging?
Sure. So as community bankers, we rely very heavily on our core system providers to deliver solutions for us, and integration is not something that is easily or readily available for the banks without relying on their cores. So what we've been working on is trying to figure out ways for the core providers to be more engaged with the fintech solution providers to be able to deliver to market at a faster pace than we have historically for community banks.
Interesting. In preparing for our conversation, I read a little bit about some of the things you've been writing about in terms of the space, and it was a really interesting concept that you presented in terms of how community banks, credit unions can adopt new technologies, for example. And you sort of broke it down as this idea of the 3 T's of time, talent, and treasure. I was wondering if you could maybe elaborate on that. I thought it was a really interesting way for folks to sort of conceptualize what's going on there.
Sure, so when you're trying to rationalize whether you bring it in-house and build it yourself, or you partner with somebody, or you completely outsource everything, you've got to take into consideration what I call the 3 T's. Do you have the time to dedicate to not only building it, but maintaining it going forward?
Sure.
Do you have the treasure, meaning do you have enough money? Because we all know that you can start up a solution, but in this day and age, just even keeping up with security can be very expensive.
Good point.
And especially if you're talking in the app world. I mean, every morning I get up and there's probably 6 or 7 updates for apps on my phone.
Sure.
So just the cost to maintain that, you've got to make sure that you have the treasure. And then from a talent perspective, you've got to make sure you've got the right people on staff and that they understand the technology and where things are going, and that you're able to continue to support it into the future with the skill sets that you have.
Right. One thing I'm particularly curious about, thinking back a little bit about your background, having spent so much time in community banking, can you tell us a little bit about your transition from that world into your current space, and both how it's worked for you, and then some of the things you've been able to bring from that exceptional length of career in community banking to what you're doing right now?
Sure. So at ICBA Bank Card, what we do is we go out and we meet with the vendors and we look for products and solutions and the integration process to bring those to market for the community banks. So for example, we do business with WorldPay, with Fiserv, with Vantiv. Well, Vantiv is WorldPay now. With FIS is a big provider, big partner of ours, and we have a variety of other vendors that we work with, but the main goal is to make sure that we can come up with solutions, bring them to market in an efficient, affordable manner for the community banks.
In terms of what community banks are dealing with now, maybe compared to the challenges that you had to deal with, what would you say are some of the most foremost as they relate to trying to find the right sorts of solutions, the right sorts of partners that are going to work for the specific sorts of either members in the case of a credit union or customers in the case of a community bank? Yeah,
I think the challenge, whether you're a credit union or a community bank, I think the biggest challenge is the integration. Because the more partners you bring into a solution, the harder it is to bring it all together.
Right.
So I think historically there's been a lot of dependence on the core provider to deliver, and if the core didn't have it, it didn't come to market. We're seeing that transition, and some of our community bank clients are very progressive in fintech space. They've started their own fintech spin-off companies. They've created their own API environment where they're able to integrate with a number of providers. So we're definitely seeing a shift in that direction. We're also seeing a shift with the core vendors and their willingness to open up their architecture and allow the APIs to integrate to them. FIS in particular, we partner with very closely on a lot of this stuff, and they have a venture in Little Rock called the Accelerator. And so they're going through the process right now where they start with hundreds of fintech companies applying to be able to demonstrate, and they whittle it down until they have about 10 to 20 of them that are on the candidate list for financing.
Wow,
and
very
for partnership.
Nice.
So.
Yeah, interesting. It's one of the things I always enjoy about the conversation with community banks. We're an event like this at Finovate Spring. We're in Silicon Valley. We do our shows in New York. So there tend to be a sort of a big city or big region focus, where all the attention is. But then you hear about things that are happening in a place like Little Rock or places like St. Louis, and it really reminds you of the diversity of not just the community institutions themselves, but the diversity of intensity in trying to really pursue these. I'm wondering, with that diversity within all those different community banks, is there anything that you note about the banks that really do seem to be able to maximize the advantage that you get through partnerships, through effective partnerships at least?
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting. I think in a lot of ways, competition is driving those decisions, and we see areas, the New England market, Boston, New York, in particular, we see a lot of innovation going on there.
Okay.
But then we see pockets here and there. I've got customers in the cities, in Minneapolis, St. Paul, who are doing some pretty progressive things, and they're competing with top 10 financial institutions. Yeah. I've got another one in northern Wisconsin, who has a completely standalone independent net bank.
Wow.
So there's a lot of opportunity out there, but one of the things that I point out in the blog that you were referring to is, pick a niche and stick with it. If you're trying to be all things to all people, you're going to have a tough time. You're going to have to figure out what your strategy is, who your target client is, and really pick an area of concentration and really do it well.
Yeah, that's a really good point. It's something that I've heard from some other folks with experience in community banking, that one of the ways of managing that challenge with other community banks, the large financial institutions, is really to figure out who your customers are, what is it what your special sauce is, so to speak, and to really maximize that as a way of sort of separating yourself from the pack.
Yeah, absolutely.
One thing I just wanted to talk a little bit briefly about, we're running out of time a bit, some of the initiatives that your organization has been involved with in partnerships. One of the ones I noticed was a partnerships with NYCE Access. Nice, yeah.
Yep.
And but you also mentioned another one with a Finovate alum that I thought was interesting with gifting. I wonder if you could maybe talk a little bit about that.
Sure. So we announced on Giving Tuesday that we had formed a partnership with GoodCoin. And with FIS, and what that solution does is it gives us the ability to deliver to community banks within their mobile banking and online banking apps the ability to do charitable giving. And for community banks, it's community first.
Yeah.
Everything is about your local community and supporting your local community. So by delivering this to market, we've enabled them to do match programs and really promote some of their local charities. I mean, there's 1.8 million charities. It's growing every day, around 1.8 million charities in the system. But this gives them the ability to partner locally and give back to their communities.
Yeah, excellent. That's a really, really great idea. You think of the role that community banks have in their communities, the relationship they have with their customers, and to be able to extend that more by helping, to partnering with customers in a sense, to help do better things for the communities. This is a really great development. We'll look forward to hear more about that. Great.
Excellent, thank you.
Great. Well, thank you very much for sitting down and talking with us for a little bit. We're looking forward to catching your fireside chat.
Yeah, no, I appreciate it. Thank you.
Great, thank you. And thank you for joining us here at Finovate Spring 2018. We'll see you again.